Good evening. Thank you for attending this event. The purpose of our presentation today is a video clip production that we've been working on for the past, I would say, 10 months or a year, that deals specifically with one of Antonio Sciortino's projects, a project of the monument of the British Empire, the temple of the British Empire to the unknown soldier. A number of you have had the opportunity to visit Musa and see and experience at first hand the plaster of Paris large-scale model, basically, of what Antonio Sciortino had envisaged. I think it is also something very topical today. Unfortunately, we live in a time when there are a lot of wars around us, and this idea of memorialization of those who unfortunately are victims and casualties of war is something that we should ponder and think about. And Antonio Sciortino, the whole story goes back to when Sciortino was in Rome, studying in Rome. He was the recipient of a scholarship to study in Rome, and he befriended Lord Granville, who was governor of Malta at the time that Sciortino went for his studies in Rome. He maintained this friendship with Lord Granville, and Sciortino had approached Lord Granville and asked him how he could contribute, basically, during World War I, to basically, he actually had almost requested joining the British Army. And Lord Granville said, "You're an artist, not a soldier. You can do something, basically, where you use your creative, artistic talents." And he started working on this grand visionary scheme. It's of enormous proportions, almost megalomaniacal in terms of scale. Hundreds of drawings producing this huge plaster of Paris model, which is not even the whole, but part of this grand conception. And he says that the idea of commemorating the unknown soldier who basically fell in the trenches of the war was his idea, that in a way some claim that he was actually stolen from him, because then we have various other memorials to the unknown soldier, the one in Westminster, the one in the basically Altare della Patria in Rome, the monument of Vittorio Emanuele II, the one in Arlington in the US, and so forth. He persevered, and he still aspired that his scheme would be realized. But by 1922, it became clear that the British authorities basically told him that basically there is no way that this would be realized, executed. Now, as a bit of an entrepreneurial Maltese, he kind of tried to rethink the whole thing and says, maybe I can remodel the concept from the British temple to the unknown soldier to an American kind of museum of military triumphs. And he tried to sell the idea to the Americans in the 1930s. He said maybe there would be the possibility of having some very wealthy capitalists who might finance this. But in the 1930s, we all know there was the Great Depression, and basically that was the end of this. So this production is basically like a documentary kind of clip, which tries to give life to basically this grand conception using digitization, kind of immersive experience. I wouldn't say AI, but very heavy on digitization, extrapolation. Then, thanks to Martin Bonnici, our film director, who was very much heavily involved, and Jez, who basically took the role as a narrator actor, who took the role of Sciortino himself, immersed in the project, where there is a script based on the testimonials left by Antonio Sciortino himself. I won't go on in terms of, I'd like to basically want you to enjoy this clip, but I need to basically give thanks to quite a lot of people. I never imagined that a 10-minute video clip would take so many hours and hours of work, and it would involve a whole army of people. First of all, I'd like to thank Jess Camilleri, who was crucial basically in the success of the narration through the voice of Sciortino. The film director, Martin Bonnici, thank you, Martin. Studio 7 were amazing, both Joe De Bono in terms of the idea. Manuel Chantar, who was, the project would never have seen the light without him. Simon de Battista, Hanan, and his whole team and crew that we have here today. Stargate as well for the visual effects, Matthew Pulicino and Dregauci. And the staff at Musa, Crystal Farrugia in particular was very helpful. Father Gino, Godwin Vella from Heritage Malta for the publication of a book basically documenting this project. And I would also like to thank my colleague, Dr. Mark Sagona, for the help from our department, the Department of Art and Art History. Finally, the support basically of Arts Council Malta, who basically financed and supported this whole endeavor. This would not have been possible without the support of the Arts Council, Musa, Heritage Malta, and our own department. I hope that you enjoy the video clip, and then we'll have a short discussion after. Thank you.
A war memorial is a commemorative object that reminds us of those who served and died in war. Memorials have taken various forms, but common to all is the desire that they serve as eternal beacons of the memories of those we have lost to war. Wartime memorials become commonplace in the aftermath of World War I. The Tjepval Arch, designed by Edwin Lutyens, is the principal tangible expression of the defining event in Britain's experience and memory of the Great War, that disastrous first day of the Battle of the Somme. Monuments are human landmarks which men have created as symbols for their ideals, for their aims and their actions. They're intended to outlive the period which originated them and constitute a heritage for future generations. They form a link between the past and the future. Monuments are the expression of man's highest cultural needs. They satisfy the eternal demand of people to translate their collective force into symbols. I am Antonio Sciortino, originally from Zabuc. I studied drawing under the direction of Lazzaro Pisani and modeling and sculpture under Vincenzo Cardona at the School of Art in Valletta. When I was 20 years old, I was awarded a government scholarship to study in Rome. There, I enrolled at the Istituto Reale di Belle Arti, where for 2 years I studied civil engineering and monumental architecture. In 1911, I was appointed head of the British Academy of Arts in Rome, a position I occupied for 25 years. In 1914, I wanted to join the Royal Engineers, but I was advised by Lord Grenfell, the former governor of Malta, to continue working in Rome and to focus all my artistic energies on a monumental memorial project to commemorate those who died in World War I. I started to work on it day and night for 3 years, making sketches on paper and clay all the time. In 1917, Antonio Sciortino, reflecting on the war's immense loss of life, envisioned a grand international monument for the heroic dead. His concept included a museum and temple, and ideally, one which would be erected on a historic battlefield. He proposed interring scattered remains within the crypt walls and creating a central tomb to honor all fallen soldiers, regardless of rank, as a universal resting place. Sciortino's sketches bore the inscription, "Plans for a monument to an unknown soldier and sailor," intending it to serve as a symbolic tomb for millions mourning their lost sons. The monument was to feature 3 galleries a library, and a museum. One gallery would house 300 percussion instruments audible for miles. Another, 300 bells to chime on commemorative days. And a central hall with an organ for solemn occasions. Sciortino envisioned it as more than a war memorial, but a site like Westminster Abbey honoring notable figures as well. Sciortino's project was conceived as an autonomous, grand urban conception that encapsulated the architectural spirit of the glorious historical past. In his testimonial, Sciortino boasted that there are 5 styles of architecture in the temple, a statement that infers that his design borrowed from various historical architectural epochs. Sciortino's design, in fact, reflected the eclectic architectural style of his time. Rome, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, saw a surge of monumental construction, such as Giuseppe Sacconi's monument to Vittorio Emanuele II. Completed in 1911, this grandiose structure influenced Sciortino's monument to the unknown soldier, sharing its ornate classicism rooted in the Beaux-Arts tradition. Sciortino initially proposed the monument for London, but the significant land required made the central urban location impractical. Richmond, on London's outskirts, was suggested, with 6 bridges over the Thames providing access. But despite his efforts, British high officials, including Lord Melchett and the 27th Earl of Crawford as first commissioners of works, rejected the project. By 1921, Sciortino realized his vision would not materialize in Britain, leaving the United States as the only potential hope for its realization. There is not enough money in Europe to undertake this project, and unless American capitalists can be induced to undertake the erection of the Temple of Nations as a war memorial, the idea will have to be shelved for generations. It was claimed that the cost to realize Sciortino's project would amount to $50 million. Sciortino persevered with his efforts to promote his vision in the American press, naively hoping that his idea would captivate the interest of one of America's affluent entrepreneurs. However, despite the admiration expressed for the project, no offer was ever forthcoming. There was no Rockefeller or Vanderbilt who came forward to finance Sciortino's project, and the Great Depression shattered his dream of realizing his grand conception. That is the trouble with us artists. We always think too big. We are always too far ahead. By the mid-1930s, the fascist regime in Italy promoted an anti-British political agenda, and Malta was considered as terra irredenta, one of the battle cries of Mussolini's anti-British campaign. Subsequently, the British Academy of Arts in Rome became one of its main targets. Sciortino, as its director, and a Maltese one at that, found himself in an unenviable and almost impossible position. His close affiliation with Britain, both as a Maltese national and British subject, meant that as the Academy's director, his allegiance was to the British Crown. Sciortino was subjected to relentless pressure to renounce his British citizenship and to offer his allegiance to the Italian fascist state. Attempts were made by the Italian authorities to entice him with offers of a commission for a public monument, but these were rejected by the artist. This tense political situation left no leeway for adopting a non-committal stance. It signified the point of no return for Sciortino. In January 1936, after serving for 25 years as a director of the British Academy of Arts, the institution had to close its doors. With the political climate fast deteriorating, Sciortino left Rome for Malta, never to return. Monuments are products of a unifying consciousness and culture, which by their intrinsic nature have the power and capacity to create these symbols. Sciortino's scheme for the temple to the unknown soldier was conceived as a potent symbolic representation of the loss of human life in war. The project was Sciortino's highly personal and to a certain extent megalomaniacal utopian dream. His monumental scheme, rooted in a timeless classical tradition, is self-assertive and proud. It does not glorify war, but invites contemplation. It dignifies the wasteful sacrifice of young men, memorializing them in a grand gesture and breathtaking architectural conception. As the French painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir stated, "The pain passes, but the beauty remains."
Thank you. Now we'll have a short panel discussion. I'd like to invite the film director, Martin Bonnici, my colleague, Mark Sagona, who's the head of the Department of Art and Artistry. And if we could have the lights on, that will be helpful. Okay. And I think if we could have some of the background images regarding, okay, fine. Okay. Who shall start? Shall we start with? Maybe Martin, you'd like to tell us something about, Martin has undertaken quite a number of productions, but probably this is one of the first one of its kind. Maybe you could tell a bit our guests about basically the whole experience.
Of course. So yes, I've been working as a director and producer for the past 15 to 18 years. And this was quite a unique experience for me. And mostly for two reasons. That it was the first time I was working on the sort of documentation of Maltese architects' work. And it was also the first time that I was involved in a production that used the new technology of virtual production. So it's going to be a favorite one of mine that sticks with me for quite a while. And there were two things that drew me to the project. First of all, the involvement of Studio 7 and Stargate Studios. When I was approached about the project, I was approached by Studio 7, and although I'm an independent artist, I've had a good experience working with them, and I always know that I'm in safe hands and that they take their work seriously, so that always draws me to a project. And Stargate, I've known Stargate since their inception as well. But on a more personal level, what really drew me to it is that it felt like a celebration of a Maltese artist in quite a rare way. Unfortunately, I feel that we don't celebrate Maltese artists as much as we should, and be it architects or painters or sculptors or theater makers, writers, etc. So it introduced me to a new part of Sciortino's work, and the opportunity to share his work with a greater audience was really important for me.
I think one of the things when we're discussing the production as well is the musical background accompaniment to the video clip is by a certain Giovanni Sgambati. Now, initially, through the research, we discovered that Antonio Sciortino knew Sgambati personally. And Sgambati was quite influential. He was mentored by Franz Liszt, knew all the great Italian composers, Puccini and others. He had a huge, enormous palazzo next to the Piazza di Spagna. And in his testimonial, Antonio Sciortino had mentioned that Sgambati had promised to compose a piece of music specifically for the project. Obviously, this never materialized. But I told Martin, I said, there's no other way, but we have to have Sgambati music, and then we found the Requiem of Sgambati to accompany this. So in a way, we had a lot of these exchanges, and even through, finding this interaction between different, the role of jazz as a narrator, basically, the technical, experimental nature of the technology that we're using. In a way, that must have also been kind of challenging on all different fronts as well.
I wouldn't call it challenging. I actually call it the magic of filmmaking. That is one of the most beautiful parts of working in media. I'm not one to subscribe to the idea of the auteur filmmaker that, even in popular films, you have this single mind that is responsible for all the beauty we witness, the story, the art, the music, and so on. Media production of any kind is the amalgamation of many different talented people. As you said, it took a small army to pull this off.
A whole army, yes.
And everyone's input enriched this project, from the camera operator to you as the consultant and the mind that birthed this idea. We all worked together to put this small piece of work. And for me, that is the beauty of the industry and the medium that I work in.
Mark, I think the point to raise is, and we had a discussion about this, is the relevance of Sciortino when it comes to memorialization of the war dead, even 100 years later in today's context. How relevant is Sciortino's kind of grand scheme within things? And I know you've prepared some images as well of other projects. Maybe you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Well, basically, obviously, Sciortino was speaking with the language of his time. So we are in the early 20th century. We are at the time of the First World War. So as a time bracket, the First World War actually it closes the Belle Epoque and the style which was used increasingly in architecture and in design and decoration was the eclectic style. So Sciortino is, as we said, so he makes reference that he's using 5 different styles of architecture, for example. So Sciortino at that time, it was this megalomaniac approach, which I think if we are going to try to find the roots for this megalomania, which at the same time you have the Vittoriano in Rome. But this has been long coming, and I think this goes back to the late 18th century, at least to the time of Piranesi. So, and I think even looking at the images of the drawings especially, the genius of Sciortino, I think more than in the model, it emerges in the drawings. The drawings that show this great dedication to this magnificent project, but this love for the grand and the grandeur, is very synonymous with Piranesi in the late 18th century, and this continues throughout the 19th century. Now, today, if we visit memorials to the dead or to the murdered, or if we mention the memorial of 9/11 at New York last year, I was there, and I think the contemporary or the modern monuments emphasize reflection, personal reflection, rather than trying to force us to think in terms of grandeur or memorialization. Here, when you go there is a certain poignancy which plays on our presence, rather than having something that overpowers you. It is something that brings you to meditate and reflect. For example, I think in New York, the loss of space or the absence of form, the absence of that monumentality. So this is almost the reverse of Sciortino. Where Sciortino is building on a very large scale, here you are removing, and you have this absence, this hollow space. And when you're there and you see this, for example, the waterfall, the water going down in that hollow, in that abyss, perhaps the abyss of the afterlife, the abyss of what comes later. So we move, especially after the Second World War. I think this happens after Auschwitz and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all that, as if there is a break with the past, and we go towards something. Last year, Conrad, if you remember, we were in Vienna. Not last year, last March actually, and we visited the Holocaust monument in Vienna, where you have that block, and so this interest in abstraction as a language, or abstraction as a way to make us meditate, perhaps. So there is a greater emphasis on the concept, on the contemplative aspect. If I may, if I can quote Marcel Proust, in his book In Search of Lost Time, he distinguishes between two different types of memory. And he talks about the nostalgia in the past, and Sciortino's, in his language, is being nostalgic, because there is this eclecticism, and eclecticism is rooted in the romantic, is rooted in this nostalgia, and this revivalism. So to a certain extent, the language that Sciortino is using is very much revivalist, and therefore it is connected with a certain sentimentality. And then there is a living memory which is active in the present and free of nostalgia for a remembered past. So I think we need to distinguish between that kind of monument, and like the Vittoriano, etc., and the monuments which were built after the Second World War.
Yes. I would also add to what Mark is saying. And Antonio Sciortino, he prided himself. We all obviously appreciate him and know him more as the designer of public monuments and as a sculptor, first and foremost, not as an architect. But he actually, when he went to Rome, he studied as well. He took a course in monumental architecture. And there are phrases in his own testimonial where he says that the sculptor or the artist almost has to bow his head to the architect. So he distinguishes the two. And as Mark is saying, it is during this era of eclecticism. He's almost boasting, I have 5 different styles of architecture in my project. And he's being very honest about it, and he's being very unapologetic. It's like, you see how much I know.
He's proud.
I'm proud of the fact that I'm producing all these 5 styles there. But it is a product of the time, eclecticism and historic revivalism.
I mean that was,
part and parcel.
This is an extension of the 19th century, really and truly, okay, which is immersed in this borrowing of ideas. And apart from Piranesi, which, as I said, I think that there is that quality, but he is very much borrowing from the Vittoriano. I mean, even in the crowning victories with the wings and all the statuary.
Although I do have to say that there are only 2 architectural projects. The other lesser-known project by Sciortino, which is an architectural project, is the Lighthouse project, which is also very interesting. And the Lighthouse project project. It was called the Lighthouse Project. First of all, it looks like, a vertical, almost ziggurat-like kind of tower. But the lighthouse it was established was apparently some competition for an organization known as the Lighthouse that was set up by two American women, basically, who were dedicating their voluntary efforts to help those soldiers who were blind during the war. As a result of the war, they lost their sight and vision. And this society set up a number of associations in different countries called the Lighthouse. And he was asked to design possibly a headquarters of this institution, the Lighthouse, in New York. And the bozzetto is also at Musa. And it is much more, I would say, Art Deco. It's much more abstracted, far less so than the monument to the unknown soldier, which is much more heroic and much more eclectic.
In fact, this eclecticism that we see in the monument is a reflection of Sciortino's own expression, because even as a sculptor, he is borrowing from everything. If you look at Sciortino, at one point he is like Rodin, at one point he is much more Art Deco, at one point, so he is all the time changing. And this Art Deco, I think we need, because obviously we have made a lot of emphasis on this link with il futurismo and especially the idea of speed. But in the stylization, there is a lot of Art Deco in Sciortino. And remember, so the second and third decades of the 20th century, this is the time when our Art Deco is raging, and therefore he is absorbing all these ideas.
Martin, if you were to see basically within the film industry and production of things which are maybe documentary, kind of more inclined to explore artistic themes, do you see scope and potential in terms of, I don't know if there were similar endeavors to what we've done here on a small scale, but to the powers that be, to the authorities, do you see possibilities of also trying, because this humble production in a way can also help once it's posted on digital media. It could help also to raise awareness and for people to visit Musa and to visit the collection. What are your thoughts about this potential of such similar productions?
I think it's not just that there is space, but there's a big need for more of this kind of work. I've been lucky to work on a number of projects that are similar in the sense that they are short documentaries or even a mini-series about artists or art or archaeology in Malta. And one of my fondest projects is something that was commissioned by the National Book Council a few years ago. I think we produced it in 2018 or 19 with Valletta Pictures. And we did a mini-series about 8 Maltese authors. And each episode had a 15-minute documentary about the author and a 15-minute short film that was based on their writing. And to this day, it was shown on PBS, on TVM, then was placed on YouTube for everyone to access. To this day, I still get messages from people that are just discovering it now, 6-7 years later, and telling me how much they enjoyed watching it because they learned about our authors, our stories. I was lucky enough to work on a small project, the recreation of a Roman villa in Zaytun. And it's being used by university students to better understand the structure of Roman villa, because there's a difference between seeing a sketch on paper and being able to explore the model in 3D. And I've had other projects of the sort. I think it's important because we grow up hearing more about Caravaggio than Cali, for example, which it pains me a bit because at the end of the day, Caravaggio, although he left some amazing artwork in Malta, he spent 2 years of his life, more or less, in Malta. Whereas Cali is a Maltese artist that grew up in our society. He was part of our society and left work as well. So I think we need to find ways to push the stories of artists we've had in different media along the way, along the ages, and build a better sense of, it helps us build a better sense of who we are as a nation as well.
There's the pedagogical aspect as well, educational aspect. If we want our young students to be interested in this, we have to present it in a way which is not the kind of pedestrian way of kind of just reading it through text, but rather,
Agreed, 100%. Another project I produced a few years ago was a short film adaptation of Ir-Raġel Tal-Klieb by Oliver Frigieri. And it's on YouTube as well. And a lot of people commented on the video saying, I read this at school, but now I feel it more. I can feel the story. I can really feel what Oliver Frigieri was writing. Whereas at school, I couldn't really get it. Because we're living in a very visual world where digital media and new media are a big part of the landscape. And we need to start using these tools more to tell our story.
I think at this point we should maybe invite members of our guests to express an opinion or views or any questions. Feel free. I think there is a roving mic there, so don't be shy. Joe Schiro.
I stand to be corrected here, but we owe the survival of these drawings to Dennis Vella, to the late Dennis Vella. And I think we should mention him because he had the foresight and everything, and he knew their importance immediately.
Yes, it's a good thing, Joe, you're mentioning this. Dennis Vella, we were talking about him this morning with Bernardine. I think it's passed away 15 years ago. He was, I would say, the first, was very much one of the curators of the Fine Arts Museum at that time. He was, I would say, one of the first, after probably Giovanni Bonello's father, Vincenzo Bonello, but one of the first one to really embark on a serious study of Sciortino with a very important catalogue and publication. I forgot how many years ago, but he really put Sciortino on the map.
I think that was in the year 2000.
Year 2000, that's 25 years ago.
I knew Dennis pretty well. I used to go to his office pretty regularly. But and in fact, Joe, that you're mentioning this, in the 90s, I don't remember exactly the year, but an exhibition was held at the Fine Arts Museum at South Street, and I remember the model being exhibited and even some of the drawings. But now that we're mentioning Dennis Vella's like reviving these drawings, it is also thanks to the sculptor from Rabat, Giuseppe Gallia, who was in 1947 sent to Rome to retrieve all the plasters which were left during, so we are really very, very lucky that we still have these plaster models with us here, because during the war they were left there. So God knows what could have happened, and thankfully with the Sciortino bequest of 1947, Giuseppe Gallia is sent to Rome to retrieve all the plaster, so the plaster models that are in the Sciortino room now at Musa, they come thanks also to Giuseppe Gallia. So I think we should
one
give him
other
credit.
Anecdote or episode was the excitement that Dennis had felt and shared with everyone when he rediscovered Sciortino's funerary monument in the Cimitero Cattolico in Rome.
In fact, I remember that. I had given a lecture at what is now the Valletta campus. At that time it was Heritage Malta, and I think this was 2005, could it be? 2006. And I had given a lecture, and I remember that when he had discovered which is a marble sculpture, which is at the Cimitero Cattolico in Rome, next to the pyramid of Caio Cestio.
Okay, any other?
There was, I think, someone there.
Someone. That's, I think Albert.
Hi, Conrad. I feel that, I don't know, I'm just talking of my head, really. I think that there should be an instigation that this project of Sciortino should be promoted again in the United States. Say there's plenty of land over there. That why not?
You might get Trump.
Trump might appropriate it.
I know it's not easy. It's not easy, but it's a beautiful project. It's a beautiful project.
I suspect that the ethos that Sciortino intended it for won't survive.
Yes, I know. But you can never tell. You can never tell.
But I think it's a product of its time. But in any case,
I know
yes,
it's time, but it's still valid. I think it's still valid.
Yeah, you need deep pockets for sure to implement it. It will cost millions. Chris, I think Chris Gregg, yes.
First of all, congratulations for this piece of work, which really, I think, does justice to Sciortino's work and really highlights a production, an artistic creation that that deserves a lot of admiration. But I want to refocus slightly because I think that Sciortino was a bit stuck in the past here, and he's over-egged this pudding because when you consider the monuments that we now associate with the First World War, primarily the Thake Arch and especially the cenotaph, which are real distillations of kind of sentiment and remembrance. I mean, to me, as an architect also, the cenotaph, just the idea that all the verticals meet, whatever it is, 999 feet in the air, right? They're not actually vertical, but they converge to some kind of higher point in space, is very powerful. But Sciortino doesn't, and I think this is why he wasn't successful in convincing clients later after the First World War, not even after the Second World War. He doesn't seem to have been aware of the societal impact of the First World War on traditional society and culture and class divisions, etc. And I think that's why the monuments, certainly in Britain, are so much simpler because they understand the cultural rupture that was caused. And I think this really, I mean, watching your production made me think, why did the British School in Rome choose someone with a Mediterranean frame of mind to be the head of the British School in Rome? And I just can't fathom why they chose a Maltese person, especially when you look at monuments like the Thake Arch and the cenotaph, which have nothing to do with the monumentality and the grandeur and the kind of Mediterranean spirit and the 5 styles of architecture. There's a complete mismatch there. I'd really like to know, maybe not this evening, why Sciortino was chosen to be the head of the school.
I think that if we ever have the opportunity to make a feature-length documentary about Sciortino's work, that's something that we could also approach and discuss because it's an interesting point.
We are at present working on, is Chris here, working on this thing. We should differentiate between the British School and the British Academy. So the British funded school was the British School. And that's where the British School, let's speak about colonial power, invested all their energy in it. So that was the School of Archaeology, that was the School for History, that was the School for Painting, and the School for Architecture. And then the British colony in Rome had all these youngsters coming from all their colonies, and they needed to keep them out of the British school. So they formed the British Academy, and they found Sciortino as the most appropriate person to direct the British Academy, which was nothing more than a workshop. So it had this extraordinary title, but it was a workshop in Via Margutta. So if we run away with the idea that this was an academy similar to the Regia Accademia or to the German Academy or to the American Academy, then the convergence there goes towards the British School, which is completely different to the British Academy. And there are letters about it, there are reports about it. It had a function. It was an evening school. All the Maltese artists, or most of the Maltese artists, went there because they found it very convenient. It was gratis, it was free, and they had their Maltese professor who was there technically opening doors for them and also for tourists who were visiting Rome and wanted to draw and paint. They found Sciortino to be very comfortable because he was working on this wonderful project for them, especially in the early stage, as Professor Thake has said, so he was probably paid. They paid his rent over there, but more or less that was it. There are reports about it, so it was a beautiful story, but also a sad story. Having a great name, but so yes, he was comfortable for London.
So the academy, it wasn't an academy.
My point is, and we're writing a paper now on this, and we're actually working with the Henrik Anderson Museum because he was very close to Henrik Anderson, and we're finalizing a book on this, that the British Academy wasn't really an academy, but an academy in name, by the way, because the British ambassador in Rome, as Professor Thake said, found him very useful. He was the last man standing there, and he was truly one of the last persons standing there.
I think tying into what Professor Sciortino was saying, one could see him a bit as a kind of tragic figure as well, because he had so much potential to leave a mark internationally. Although in Malta he left his mark indelibly, but I mean he had a series of misluck or misfortune. I mean all the competitions he won in Ukraine, in Russia, they never came to fruition. I mean the grand scheme here was destined to fail, but in a way, and then the war broke out, the rise of fascism. Somehow every time he was kind of on the verge of making some breakthrough or leaving an impact.
He was the most unfortunate.
I mean, things.
One of the most unfortunate sculptors in Rome. He made money out of portraiture. So he made money out of portraiture. There's a whole list of the portraits that he actually carved the portraits of the rich, of the super rich. So that was his main line. And then he had made these grand projects. Some were chosen, but unfortunately because of turbulences, they never materialized.
And even because he was a British citizen. When he wins the competition for the Vittorio Emanuele Bridge, he is excluded then because he is not an Italian citizen. So
anyhow, we have time for one final question, maybe. Okay. Now I'd like to invite Godwin Vella from the publishing division of Heritage Malta. First, I'd like to thank Martin and Mark for their interventions, and I'd like to invite Sir Godwin Vella, who will be talking a bit about a publication that is part of this kind of production, that supplements this production. And in the meantime, we could have the next presentation as background to it, basically. And I'll pass on the mic to Godwin.
Thank you. First of all, a very big well done for the production of this very fine documentary. This documentary will definitely go a long way, first and foremost, of increasing the visibility of the very rich collection treasured within Musa. Apart from that, this documentary will surely prove to be also very useful, very engaging in the interpretation of the same collection, and at the same way helping to craft a more memorable experience within the museum halls. And to this effect, we've produced this publication by Professor Thake. This publication, first and foremost, is testimony to the very extensive and exhaustive research required for the production of such a fine documentary. Apart from that, this publication is also intended to enrich further the experience within Musa by providing a memento, a souvenir of the museum. Thereby visitors who are interested to learn more about this particular artifact on display have this opportunity to discover and learn more. Apart from that, this publication is also testimony to the close collaboration between Musa, Heritage Malta, and the Arts Department at the University of Malta. We collaborate on various initiatives. Only a few weeks ago, Dr. Mark Sagona and a couple of months later, Dr. Christina Attard were both involved in the Musa Thake project. Apart from that, hopefully this will be the first, this publication will be the first of a very long list of collaborations, of publications and other initiatives, because ultimately we both stand to gain, and ultimately both Heritage Malta, both Musa, and on the other hand, the Department of Art, actually we are complementing each other. We're not competing, we're just complementing each other. And we believe very much in this collaboration, and therefore we look forward to more collaborations in this sense. This publication also, I must say, is the third publication within the series Maltese Artists. This is the fourth, actually. It is the third this year. Earlier this year, we had two other publications, which also shed light on other important artists, Maltese artists, and which are all available from our shop at Musa. I must end this small contribution by first and foremost thanking Professor Thake for trusting us with his work. It's been a very good pleasure, interesting pleasure to collaborate with you. Professor Thake is the ideal author for a publisher. Professor Thake is one of the ideal authors because he's very meticulous. Everything is prepared in great detail. So even this publication, for instance, was produced, the design and layout was produced within a few weeks. There are other people who contributed, of course. There are our colleagues from Musa, in particular Chrisel, and also my colleagues at the publishing department, particularly Maria Muscat, who was responsible for the editing, and also Sharice Mikallef, who did the design and layout. Therefore, thank you. This publication is available from the Musa shop, so anyone interested can acquire a copy from the reception. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to invite you now to basically, we can go to Musa and have a drink, basically, and you can discuss, and whoever wants to get a copy as well is welcome to do so. But just one last thing, I'd like to take a group photograph of all those who are involved in the production of the video clip and the book. If we could just all line up, because I don't think there's going to be another opportunity where we're all together in one space. So Martin, whoever was involved basically in the film production, I'm seeing Andrea over there, Andrea should have been here. Huh? You migrated it. So if those please, Simon, Manuel, if you could please come over here, Joe, I'd appreciate it as a momentum as well of the whole. It was a real collective effort, and it's a bit like having the symphony, conducting the symphony. So many actors involved. Come, and we could have some photographs, whatever.
Hello, hi.